I remember the long summer when the old house wore the scent of lilac and rain, as if the walls themselves wanted to be kissed awake after a siesta. The kitchen floor pressed warm against the bare soles of my childhood, and the river beyond the lane kept a patient, patient time that I learned to listen to the way old men listen to chess. My mother called it a safe, ordinary season, and I believed her, because what else could a child do but believe the ordinary when it fits so snugly around your shoulders like a shawl? The house stood at the lip of the village, where the map ends and the damp breath of the river begins. It wasn't grand, not by the standards of photos and family tales. A two-storied thing with a crooked chimney and a back stair that groaned as if it carried its own sorrow. It smelled of clean linen and something sweeter, a hint of old sugar and the salt of the marsh that crept in under the door when the sea breathed in the evening. The world outside kept time by boats and bells. Ours kept time by kettle whistling and the clock in the hall that never agreed with the one in the kitchen. Lydia was my neighbour's girl, a shade taller than me and twice as fearless, the sort who believed you could coax a summer storm into quiet with a dare and a smile. She lived next door and came to spend long, reckless days on the riverbank, where the grass grew so high you could vanish in it and not know that you'd ever left. We were a pair of pilfered hours, 3 o'clock after lunch, when the air loosened and the world leaned toward mischief. Our favourite mischief was a ritual, something so ordinary and innocent that the grown-ups never noticed its gravity, the way a storm notices a quiet room. On the evenings, when the air had cooled enough to taste like lime and iron, Lydia and I would slip into the pantry with the tin canisters and the scent of dried herbs that clung to our sleeves like a memory, and draw a circle on the floor with the tip of a dull knife, not to harm, but to invite. We laid 3 small objects inside the circle: a shell picked from the riverbank, a coin found at the edge of the path, and a ribbon from Lydia's hair braided with care. The colour of new chestnut leaves. Then we whispered, backs pressed to the cold wall, names we barely trusted our tongues to carry, the names of people we'd lost to accident or age or rumour, the town's quiet dead, the ones who could vanish with a single breath and leave you with a house full of footsteps you kept mistaking for your own. We believed the circle could hold a thread of the past in place for a night, a safeguard against the fear of growing up, against the moment when someone you love might become someone else entirely, someone you could forget if you forgot how to listen. If Lydia whispered the names just so, if I listened with the careful awe I'd learned from the old stories my grandmother once told by lamplight, the house seemed to remember too. The floor would sigh, a paper-thin sigh, as if an old friend were tipping his hat in the ceiling. And when the night slipped its own velvet over the town, a gentle thing would come to us, perhaps the sound of a boat on the river, perhaps the shadow of a girl who looked a little like Lydia, perhaps nothing but the wind through the keyhole, which sometimes sounded sweet and sometimes wounding, depending on the weather in the world outside. We kept the ritual for a summer or two, as children do when the air is too bright and the corners too inviting to resist. Then one dusk, a day sea wild with a storm's promise, the river rose dark as glass, and the house seemed to breathe with wind and worry. Lydia's laughter, which had always braided through our games, faltered and was not heard again in the days that followed. The circle remained on the floor, a pale ring of chalk near the kitchen doors, as if the house itself wished to remind us that we had tried to call something back and failed to recognize what it would have returned if it had chosen to come. The days after felt like driftwood things, left where you thought they would be when you turned away and came back later to find them gone or rearranged. The air kept seeping into our bread and our sleep, and the river, which had once been a confident friend, began to whisper warnings in a way that didn't feel like warning at all, but like a memory you'd forgotten you'd had. I grew older, learned to walk with the careful stiffness of a person who had already learned how to lose a piece of herself in the process of becoming someone else's memory. When I asked my mother about Lydia, she would smile with that soft sadness people wear when they know more than they tell and tell less than they know, saying, "She's gone where you'll go, dear, if you stay long enough to listen to the river's old stories." I never thought of Lydia again with the unquiet, unforgotten ache you expect to feel from a friend who vanished. Time, in its quiet way, rearranged the world so that the attic collected dust, the pantry grew quieter, and the circle on the floor appeared damper. As if the chalk itself remembered more than we did. Years folded into decades, and the house aged as the town aged, with the same river at its back and the same lilac at its throat each spring. I left the village when I married, and I brought the house with me in a way that old people bring with them the feel of a first home, the sense that the rooms know you, even when you cannot name your own hands anymore. Now I am old enough that the word remember bends when I say it, as if it's carrying a weight it was never meant to carry. My hands, once nimble with the work of mothering and mending, tremble a touch when I lift a teacup, but they still remember the shape of the circle we drew in Lydia's kitchen, as if memory itself were a clay to be shaped anew. The house in my care, this house that has seen me through 100 winters and 1,000 small griefs, holds its breath with me. As if the old stones know what it means to be tired forever and still have to rise for another dawn. Then, one dull afternoon, when the light came in through the blinds with a yellowed gentleness, I stubbed my toe on a loose board in the hall and found beneath a crack of air that wasn't air, but something like a hinge between nooms. I pried the board loose and found the circle etched into the subfloor beneath the planks, smaller now, older, and somehow freshly drawn. The shell, the coin, and Lydia's ribbon lay within it, as if the night we named things into the circle had returned to claim its due. The ribbed paper of time had peeled away around the circle, and there, on the floor, I saw a thin line of push gaslight glow, not bright, but bright enough to see patterns in the dust. Patterns that suggested a second circle, not in chalk, but in something like memory itself, fragile